Back in the 1920s and 30s, some used to say that the road leading to Peppermint Grove Farm was haunted. The ghost road ran by the old property, dark and sombre, scene of tragedies. Peppermint Grove Farm was established by John and Anne Fouracres in the mid-1850s on the old coach road, amongst countryside covered in tuat forest, and 3 miles from the coast where the waves of the Indian Ocean lapped. The road had been made by convicts in the 1850s, and the coach from Perth to Bunbury used to pass by. So at the junction of the Mandurah to Bunbury Road, John opened an inn. The railway from Perth to Bunbury was completed in 1893, ending the coaching days and the wayside inn. One account has it that Peppermint Grove Farm was originally 2 miles to the north. One day a son of John and Anne's went missing when he was 5 years old, and despite a search of the surrounding bush and swamp, nothing was found. Some months later a child's leg and foot dropped from a large fig tree into the kitchen garden, where Anne Fouracres was standing, and it was discovered that the boy had climbed to the very top of the giant tree, but had slipped and wedged his neck in a branch and suffocated, and eventually decomposed. The little body was buried under the tragedy tree, and the house, except for the chimney, was moved south and rebuilt. Whether this is true is unknown. There was a brother named John Thomas, born in 1859, who may have died young, but Peppermint Farm was established before then. When John Fouracre chose to move his residence from Peppermint Grove to Drakesbrook, near Waroona, following his second marriage in 1900, his adult children remained living at Peppermint Grove. Gradually they moved out until, for the past 3 or 4 years, only his youngest daughter, Leah, elected to remain living alone at the farm. She had been born there in 1862 and lived there her whole life. Her sister Martha had gone to keep house for Robert, leaving Leah alone. Robert Fouracre owned the property, and Leah managed it as an outstation for grazing. She was frequently visited by relatives and friends, and known for her kindness to others. On the 18th of August 1907, a Sunday, shortly before midday, Michael Lyons rode into Peppermint Grove Farm. He had come from Lionvale, near Hamel. Michael had married Leah's sister Alice 8 years earlier. He had stayed at the farm for a couple of days 3 weeks before, leaving on the afternoon of the 30th of July. All had been well then. Now Michael was shocked by what he saw. The homestead had been razed by fire. Only the stone walls still stood. A dairy attached to the back of the house had also caught fire and been destroyed. He hastened down and began looking for his sister-in-law. He went to her bedroom, and in the wreckage glimpsed human remains that he assumed were those of Leah. The body was lying on its back with the head toward the door. Michael hurried away to raise the alarm, first stopping at Waroona to inform Leah's brother Robert of the tragedy, and then rode on to Pinjarra to alert the police. At about 3 p.m, a friend of Leah's, a farmer named George Sutton from Mandurah, called at the farm, and he too discovered to his horror that it had burned down. While he was there, a neighbour named Robert Parle arrived, and together they too checked the ruins and located the charred remains of Miss Fouracre. The arms and legs had burned away, as had most of the face, the skull baked to a brittleness. The body was just inside the doorway, the roof above the corpse having not fallen in. Summoned to the farm, Mounted Constable Henry Mann and a man named Pavey arrived at 6 p.m. It was almost dark and rain was falling as they confirmed there was a body in the destroyed house. It seemed like a tragic accident, a lonely end for 45-year-old Leah Fouracre. Leah was a true country girl. She was only 5'4", of a slim, medium build. She looked 10 years younger than her actual age. Her hair, which was cut short like a man's and parted in the middle, was of a chestnut colour. She usually wore a man's hat. Described as an excellent bushwoman and horse rider, she had a strong nature, was a crack shot, considered one of the best shots in the entire state with a rifle, was proficient at tracking and bushcraft, and could carry out farm work as well as any man, and butcher her own meat as well as any butcher. On the farm were horses, dairy cows, pigs, white pigeons, fowls, and ducks. All of her animals were found in good condition, although the gardens were somewhat overgrown. She was also fond of reading and jewellery, and had a small collection of pieces. She had rarely strayed from her bush home, never having been to Perth. She had been on a train once, in February 1907, when she visited a relative in Bunbury. She was of a generous and charitable nature. Mary Venables, who was born in 1883, was interviewed in the late 1950s for an oral history of the Harvey district. She recalled visiting Leah for short visits. On one such visit, shortly before she died, Leah had bought a silk handkerchief for Mary from Tommy, the Afghan hawker, which she still owned. Leah's nearest neighbours, the Hickersons, lived 4 miles south along the old coach road, but she had no fear of living in isolation. She always kept a loaded rifle in her bedroom, and though she was known for aiding the sick and helping those in need, it was known she would not have hesitated to put a bullet in anyone who threatened her. It was soon deduced that Leah had not, however, died in the fire. Her pet collie dog, Billy, was continuously running back and forth from the ruins of the house to a spot in the yard halfway between there and the fields, about 150 yards from the house, barking furiously. The dog and a tabby cat, one of 12 she owned, appeared to be grieving for their mistress. When the spot the dog indicated was examined, signs of a struggle having taken place there were found. A chaff bag with freshly cut green barley in it and a sun hat were found. On turning over some of the barley which had fallen out of the bag, it was found to be bloodied. 2 spades were nearby. The Peppermint Grove Farm tragedy had become an arson and murder investigation. It was believed that somebody could have concealed themselves in some wattle bushes nearby to have ambushed Leah as she cut some feed for calves on Friday the 16th of August. A discharged ball cartridge was found nearby this spot, which would fit a Martini Henry sporting rifle, a type owned by Leah. Doctors confirmed that Leah had been shot from behind. An explosive bullet had entered the back of the left shoulder and passed through her heart and lungs, killing her instantly. The body had later been conveyed inside the house, and furniture and kindling stacked up around it, drenched in kerosene and set ablaze. It had been a bright sunny day when Leah was murdered, but a few hours later the weather turned and rain began falling, which prevented the fire from completely destroying everything, even though little survived. The ashes of the bedroom were sieved, and no sign of gold or silver was found. Leah had kept a small amount in an old boot, and stored her jewellery in another boot. There were discharged cartridges and empty powder horns found. It was believed that explosions had helped in reducing the body to the state it was found in. A suspect was already being sought, a young man who had been known to Leah, named Augustin John Bertram de Kitchelin. He had first met Leah 2 years earlier, when he had asked for shelter and she had let him stay at Peppermint Grove for 5 days. He had been back since early August. Augustin's background was mysterious. He provided a life story, but how much of it was truth is not known. He claimed to have been born in Kandy, Sri Lanka, to a Muslim family. At the age of 10 in 1896, he was taken to England by a Captain Lane Fox. He was taught in Roman Catholic schools and converted to Christianity, when he adopted the name Augustin. He claimed one of his brothers had been hanged for the murder of an English officer. He and Captain Fox went to South Africa when the Boer War broke out in 1898. Fox returned to England while de Kitchelin joined one of the irregular corps. At the end of the campaign he returned to Sri Lanka, but as he had converted, his family shunned him. It was then he decided to go to Western Australia. Although talkative on most matters, he declined to talk about how he had come to be in the Waroona district. When George Sutton and his brother visited Peppermint Grove on the 13th of August, there were 2 men there with Leah. One was Joseph Hickerson, and the other was de Kitchelin, who told him that he was a police officer who was there to arrest some Indian hawkers expected to pass through the area, and to track a man named Carroll for some unspecified reason. De Kitchelin claimed that he was one of the officers who had captured 2 prisoners who had recently escaped from Rottnest Island when they made their way to Bunbury. Leah had interjected that the escapees had called at the farm, and she had given them food. De Kitchelin said it was best, as with that class of men, having no heart, they could do anything. As it happened, one of those escapees, a man named Slee, let it be known later that if he got the chance, he would kill the murderer of the woman who had fed and sheltered him. Although Leah and de Kitchelin appeared on good terms, even joking with one another, she said to Sutton before he left that she didn't know what de Kitchelin really wanted, but would find out and let him know when she saw him on his way back. De Kitchelin was described as looking 24 or 25 years of age, although he said he was 21. Stoutish, 5'4", with straight black hair, dark eyes and a copper complexion. He was very talkative and spoke English fluently. On the night of the murder he stopped at Joe Colton's house, who commented that he was lucky to have been able to borrow Leah's horse when nobody else could. Neither man slept that night, de Kitchelin being very restless. He was seen about 1 p.m. on the 17th of August near the Harvey River, heading south, riding Prinny, one of the two horses missing from Peppermint Grove, and armed with a rifle and a revolver by George Sutton. De Kitchelin had offered to buy Prinny from Leah, but she would not sell her beloved horse at any price. A warrant for impersonating a police officer was circulated, and within hours news arrived that de Kitchelin had been detained in Bunbury. With him was a Winchester rifle, 7 boxes of cartridges, a brown leather handbag containing some clothing, brooches and bangles, and a bloodied knife in a sheath. He was riding a horse belonging to Leah, which he claimed he was breaking in for her. While in police custody, he wrote a letter to Leah explaining he was not in a position to return her horse and that she should make arrangements to retrieve it. De Kitchelin had sold a lady's silver watch, a chain, and a revolver in Bunbury on the 19th of August, which were recovered by the police. At the inquest, Leah's brother Robert, who had always been protective of his sister, had his revolver taken from him in fear that he might shoot de Kitchelin and compound the tragedy. Not only the horse, but the rifle and other goods were identified as Leah's. De Kitchelin was committed to trial for murder. The trial was held in Perth, commencing on the 1st of October, and lasted for 5 days. With so much circumstantial evidence against de Kitchelin, his defence tried to argue that the Crown had neglected one point. There was no evidence that Leah Fouracre was dead. The body was so badly damaged that they could not prove that it was her mortal remains. The defence tried to suggest that £100 in gold paid to Leah by her brother was enough to have paid for a fare on a ship out of Western Australia. Yet at the same time they tried to argue that there was no motive for killing the woman, because she only had trinkets to steal. De Kitchelin had left Peppermint Grove on Thursday, not Friday, and Leah had been alive at that time, they said. The jury did not concur. They found him guilty. De Kitchelin, when asked if he had anything to say, replied, "I have this to say, that I am innocent of the crime with which I am charged. I arrived in this country 3 years ago, and since then have worked at horsebreaking, farming, and other labours, all to gain the livelihood an honest man should. 3 years ago I met Miss Fouracre, and on various occasions stopped and worked at Peppermint Grove Farm. I have never had any ill feeling against her, for she was very good to me, a coloured man. She always treated me as a mother does her son, and I loved her as a son does his mother, and a brother his sister. It is no use, I know, for me to say anything in this court. I will not get justice here, but I know, and am well satisfied, that he, the judge of all men, will give me justice. Yes, I will get it above. You say I have done this awful crime. I am a coloured man, but not a dog. You say I have murdered this woman in cold blood, but it is not so. You are murdering me. And why? Only because I am a coloured man, an Asiatic. Many of my countrymen have been murdered from this dock. God forbid that I should have ever done such a dirty, awful crime. I am a Christian, and ever since I was a little child have respected and regarded the sex of a woman. I would not have cared had you all said I had murdered one of my own sex, but this, oh, it's too awful. Let me die. Give me this death. Some day the Australians will be sorry when they know the truth. I have no more to say, Your Honour. Do with me as you will." The judge pronounced sentence of death, which provoked an outburst from de Kitchelin. Holding both arms in the air, he shouted, "May the Lord have mercy on the souls of all you men who have sent me to this shameful death for a crime I never thought of doing." Following the sentence, the counsel for de Kitchelin lodged an application for a special case before the full court regarding the identification of the body found in the ruins of Peppermint Grove, which failed to be heard. As the date for the execution loomed, a startling development was announced. A letter, written weeks earlier, had been sent to the Attorney-General of Victoria, who passed it on to the Governor-General of Australia. It was then rerouted to the Attorney-General of Western Australia. The letter said that the writer was an eyewitness to the murder of Leah Fouracre, who had left Western Australia 2 days after the crime. They did not say who had committed the crime, but said that it was not Dikichelin. The letter lacked a date, an address, or a signature, and the handwriting bore a similarity to that of Dikichelin. Whoever wrote it was regarded as a hoax, and the death sentence remained. It was carried out on the morning of the 23rd of October 1907 at Fremantle Jail. The first thing Dikichelin would have noticed was standing in the corner of the room, the plain wooden coffin awaiting his body. His was the last execution to which media representatives were admitted. After his trial, it was revealed that Dikichelin had twice been convicted of larceny. In December 1906, he was sentenced to 6 weeks' imprisonment. Not long after his release, while working at a hotel in Donnybrook, he was found with a stolen rifle and revolver. He claimed he had bought them from a hawker, the same excuse he gave for Leah's jewellery found on him after the murder. On another occasion at Bunbury, he had attacked another man with an axe. The man recuperated in hospital and then left the area, meaning Dikichelin was not charged for that assault. In letters he wrote in his last days, he admitted that he had committed countless minor crimes. The day before the execution, 22nd of October, John Fouracre, father of Leah, died at the age of 76. If the events of 1907 were not enough to cause the old road to be haunted, then there was more. Robert Powell, who was the neighbour who had spoken to Dikichelin at Peppermint Grove on the 4th of August, and who returned on the 18th to find the body, continued to live in the area. In fact, one of his favourite places to camp was in the ruins of the old farm. Perhaps because the rumour was that Leah Fouracre had hidden gold somewhere on the property. Others would come and poke about the ruins and farm buildings, but if anyone ever found anything, they never said. The ruins of the limestone walls and a bread oven are still there, and until recently surrounded by old fruit trees. An old well is nearby. Some say there is gold hidden there to this day. On the 31st of December 1919, 57-year-old Powell was duck hunting at nearby Lake Clifton when another farmer, Otto Bismarck Holb, fired a shot which disturbed the birds. In fury, Powell turned his gun on the other man and shot him dead. Powell and Hoob had been on bad terms for 3 or 4 years, due to Holb's sheep continually straying into Powell's farm. At his trial, Powell was judged insane. He was kept in prison for 10 years. When released in July 1930, he went back to his farm, and not long after, in June 1931, was noticed to be missing. A search located his body in the bush near his home. Robert Fouracre never really got over the shock of the murder of his sister. Although as a JP he presided as coroner at the inquest into the murder of a Waroona settler named Richard Williams in 1913. He rode to court on Prinny, the same horse Dikichelin had fled on 6 years earlier. He passed away in 1919 at the age of 66. Leah is buried with her parents, brother and sister Martha in St. John's Cemetery, Pinjarra. For many years the old tombstone was broken. In October 2020 it was repaired by the Murray District's Historical Society. During a blessing ceremony, a shawl and a gold sovereign belonging to Leah, which were found with Dikichelin, were placed on the grave. The artefacts are still in the care of Leah's family, more than a century later. Today the isolated old coach road has become a double-lane highway both ways, built in the 1960s, and the days of the wild Westralia seem so long ago, vanished into the dark corners of history.